Welcome to the Conscious Diabetic Podcast.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, guys. Thank you for tuning in, and welcome to the Conscious Diabetic Podcast. You can check me out on Spotify, Instagram, all the usual places at Conscious Diabetic. And today we have our next guest called Chris Bright. Now, Chris is another great sports person. I think didn't you just get your degree as well? You just got your degree. Master's degree, and he's set up a thing called the Diabetic Football Community, isn't it? Yeah. So please give us a bit of an introduction, a bit about your diabetes sort of lifestyle journey, what happened when you were diagnosed, and sort of just walk us through, and then I'll chip in through the conversation.
So I wear a few different hats in my life, if you like. But thank you very much for having me on, Brett. It'd be a pleasure to have a chat with you today about these experiences with diabetes, and I hope to hear a little bit around yours as well as we go through it.
You're a long termer, aren't you, as well?
22 years now, type 1, so okay. It's been a while, but yeah, I think I wear a few different hats, as I said, kind of different sort of aspects of life that I try and focus on. So I'm trying to help, I think, is one of my key purposes now, like giving back based on where I've been and some of the experiences that I've had. So for example, obviously I run the diabetes football community, as you said. It's kind of one of my key roles that I have. I also coach on the type 2 diabetes prevention program. So I try to encourage and inspire and also educate those that could be at risk of developing the condition in the future through lifestyle, hoping to change their views and hoping to reduce their risk of developing the condition. So I do a little bit around that. I obviously am heavily involved in sport, or have been, and will continue to be, hopefully, for a little while longer yet. So I have played international futsal for Wales. I've been a part-time footballer, if you like, been paid to play whilst working for the last sort of 8-9 years. I had to retire earlier this year I had to retire. So these are kind of the things that I would link to my experiences at the moment, which have always guided me with type 1 diabetes. So I've always wanted to give back and help. And I've always been heavily involved in sport. And as you mentioned there, I've kind of been going through my education at the same time, and always had that eye on utilizing what I can learn and the knowledge I can glean from higher education to input that into things like how we go about supporting people with diabetes. It's not just, one day I go, okay, I want to help. There needs to be a bit of a plan, and there needs to be a bit of a process around that. And that's been part of my last sort of 5 or so years. And university recently was part of that plan, and just graduated, in fact, just last week. So it's kind of a few different things that I'm up to. Obviously, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in September 1999. So 22 years as we talk at the moment. And very similar to probably many people's experiences. Brett, I've heard the CGM go off there. Hopefully we're all good.
Well timed. I did a changeover, and it'll be fine once it catches up.
So the usual sound that I am so used to. But these experiences and these memories, I think, of type 1 in the early period of my life was hard, challenging. I was diagnosed with classic symptoms, the sort of 40s that we talk about, being tired. I was getting slightly thinner. I was needing the toilet more. I was more thirsty. It was all the classic signs. As an 8-year-old, the only thing that was a slight challenge was because I was such an active kid, and it was the summertime, it was kind of masking to some of those symptoms you might expect to see anyway. So sort of, getting a bit thinner because you're running around in the heat of summer, and you're going to be more thirsty because of that. You might be a bit more tired and fatigued because of that as well. So it kind of masked a few of the symptoms. So I wasn't diagnosed until sort of the school holidays came to an end, and you kind of remember all of those sorts of memories to begin with, of GP waiting rooms and going in to see the GP or the nurse, the moment they tell you that you're living with diabetes, then going to the hospital and spending 4 or 5 days in the hospital, going through what is pretty harrowing for an 8-year-old at the time to see and feel. All of a sudden you go from this kid without any care in the world to now you need to finger prick yourself numerous times a day. You're going to be injecting at least twice a day, which obviously later in my life has turned into more like 5 or 6 times a day. But at that time it was twice a day, and just going through being on a drip and people looking at you like you're sick, and you were like, well, last week I actually felt not too bad, and things had changed so quickly in a very short space of time. But I think for me there was always a light at the end of the tunnel. There was always like a thing that I held on to, and that was sport, and that was football for me. So by the end of that first week, I think I was diagnosed on the Monday, and I actually played my first game of football, not very long, but it was 15 minutes or so, came on in the second half, the Friday night, so 4 days later. And that sort of sums up my approach really to my condition, is that I just never wanted it to stop me from doing the things that I really loved doing or enjoyed doing, but I knew that I had to take care of it. I knew I had to bring it along for the ride and sort of nurture it, because otherwise if I didn't, I wouldn't have been able to do sport. I wouldn't have been able to play in the way that I wanted to, because unfortunately sport is an awful lot about how your body is able to respond and is able to work. So maintaining good glucose levels is obviously part of homeostasis. That is then going to be the best way to achieve peak performance in a sporting environment. So I knew quite early on, I wouldn't say straight away from diagnosis, probably after a little while of feeling through some of these feelings of being low and being high, and how that actually played out in football. I knew pretty early on, maybe a couple of years in, that if I didn't keep on top of it, there was no chance of me playing at a good level of football or any sport. So that really did help stay on the sort of straight and narrow as a kid or a teenager growing up. But it didn't keep me on the straight and narrow completely, because there was times where I found it really challenging, sort of fitting in. And maybe when you get to sort of 16, 17, 18, some of the drinking culture that was around at that time when I was growing up. So you find it tough to navigate all that. But football really did help me at least stay on some kind of path and journey with my diabetes throughout the whole time I've had it.
Okay. So I do. There are parallels with that diagnosis. My earliest memories are at 5 years old. And as you said, being in the GP's office, getting that diagnosis, and then within, I think, an hour, I was over at hospital. And then I think I spent 2 weeks in hospital, in the mid 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And then the nurses were like my best friends. These people, and there was another diabetic on ward, and then I was with the cystic fibrosis law, and there was loads of other people. So it was that definition of hospitals for me has always been through my life, and always been there. And then, as you say, growing up through school, teenage years, and again, I was the only diabetic that I knew up until about 1994, when there was another diabetic called Brett, coincidentally, in high school. And then that was really the only way growing up again. And as you said, that, and it's a thing with Britain, I think, this drinking culture and partying culture, which is quite heavy in the UK as well, which some listeners in other countries might not understand. But you get in the night, for me in the 90s or the mid 90s, that drinking culture is you'd go to the park, or especially as a teenager as well, we went to the park, we drank alcohol, even growing up as well through. It was one of those. And for me, that actually took control in one part through my 20s, and in a negative way, which again, you don't, up until you deconstruct reasoning for things, you don't realize why you're doing them as well. And I'm hoping in the future we get a good clinical psychologist to talk about the impact of diabetes on people's minds, and even as a child, and what happens growing up, and even the impact as an adult as well, because the rug is pulled from under your feet. But hopefully we all realize and understand, and then grow up, take responsibility for our diabetes, and then make that choice to then, like say, give back. And this is the reason I do the podcast now, is to talk about those 36 years, to talk about everything that I went through, and then to talk with people like you that then set up things like the diabetes football community. So explain to me about the football community then. So yeah, what is that? What does it do? And I'm guessing everyone's a diabetic within the community then.
Yeah, absolutely. But spot on. Clues in the name, isn't it? The diabetes
Yeah.
football community. But yeah, it was from my own experience, the challenges that I'd faced in sport growing up, some of the stigma, some of the stereotypes, the feeling alone, feeling like there was nobody else like me that was playing football, the lack of accessibility to role models or people to talk to that were interested in the same things that I was. You can't just put me next to somebody else with diabetes and expect me to have loads in common just because we share the same condition. So the fact was, this was an opportunity to connect to people that, like me, enjoyed football as well. So, but it originates from my path, which took me to achieving my summit, if you like, of what I felt was probably the best thing that I could have achieved in sport based on where I was at, my ability, and really maxing out my potential. So that was playing for the Wales national futsal team in 2016. And I used it felt like for one moment I'd sort of overcome diabetes. You never overcome it because we live with it every day, but that felt like my moment of, Chris, you've done it. You've not, for want of a better word, you've kind of beaten it for a day. You've got to the place where probably most people wouldn't have thought you could get to. So I used that, maybe that confidence, maybe that's some that feeling to try and think, well, Chris, if you are feeling alone and you are one of the only ones maybe living with diabetes that's doing this or has done something like this, then you need to share that. You need to give that back to other people, because you know how hard that was growing up without anything like that. So it was kind of through those feelings of, it was so tough as a kid not having any support, and all of a sudden I'd kind of climbed my Mount Everest, and I'd got there, and it felt like while I was stood there at the top, I had a bit of clarity about, right, okay, you need to do something to give back now, because you actually would have been one of those kids that probably could have loved to have seen something like this. So it was in all of that really that I kind of came out with the idea of, I want to create a community, because I don't want it to be about me. Like my story is part of it, but I don't want it to continually focus about me, because I think it's bigger than me. As I said, I think there's going to be people all over the world that feel that they might be on their own. So I want it to be a community. And that was how I set out to really apply that. And I'd use social media. As we all know that social media has kind of grown now into the beast that it is. And it's a really powerful tool to connect people in a positive way, but it's also obviously one that we can see some negatives through. But I wanted to use it as a real positive tool to connect those people living with diabetes that are passionate about football, and started that in sort of February 2017 on Twitter. And then it's just spread like wildfire since then. Obviously the key was that I obviously stumbled on something which wasn't there before, and people could engage on that front, that they felt that they maybe belonged to something. So we started with Twitter, Facebook, website. Then we quickly grew from sort of an online focus with blogs and maybe some support and education on blogs and different posts, to doing things in a physical setting. So we sort of then set up conferences in conjunction with other people and other organizations. We set up a team of people that are only living with type 1 men, that then went off to represent the UK in a European tournament for people with diabetes. So we had a team from the UK, and we were playing against teams from other countries across Europe. So we've been involved in that for a couple of years. We're now growing into sort of trying to hopefully set up a women's team. We're looking to try and support. We've got now regional hubs as well. So we've kind of got like a TDFC London team. So there's enough people that have engaged that are from London. So they're now playing together in a local league, which is brilliant. We're hoping to do kids' days in the future. But the whole premise of it really, Brett, is around two key principles that I like to talk about. One's education, one's participation. So I want to make sure, and we want to make sure, the diabetes football community, that we give every opportunity that we can to help people with diabetes continue to participate in football or futsal, regardless of where they're at with their condition. So they could be newly diagnosed, they could have had it for 15 years and fallen out of love, or they might be struggling and all of a sudden they've had a number of hypos and they're trying to work it out, and that's not their confidence. There's all these sorts of things that we can hopefully help with, but we want to make sure that people continue to play a part in the sport. And then there's an education piece. So there's two things within that education piece for me. One's around ensuring that people with the condition gain more education and gain more knowledge so that they then can continue to enjoy the sport as much as possible. So helping those with the condition. And then the other side of that education piece is then around how we raise awareness of it, how we give a better, truer reflection of what diabetes is actually like in society. So using sport as our tool and our vehicle, because we know that football is a powerful vehicle within society. People look up to footballers, the way that sport's used. It just feels like a great opportunity to do that. And we use football and our community to then get involved in conversations and hopefully begin to change some of those perceptions, right some of the wrongs of stigma, and sort of change maybe some of the stereotypes in a setting that's not normally used to challenge stigma and stereotypes. Sport, in terms of football, is not one that has got a great track record with diabetes. And I think that's what we've been able to do, is kind of step in and go, this is the first time we're trying to really put a stamp on tackling the word diabetes.
No pun intended there.
Say that again.
No pun intended there.
Yeah, no pun intended. But there was, this was the step for us, and because we'd seen so much success in terms of how football is used with other maybe conditions or other disabilities, I think it was just a brilliant opportunity to do that. So the diabetes football community continues to grow. We do our own podcast as well, Brett.
Okay.
And, we've got numerous different tools and resources that we try and support and help on. So yeah, we're kind of set up in that way to do our best to help the community. And we just listen as well. We listen out for our community and what they want and how we can help and just try and, where we can, step in to provide what they're after.
Yeah. How big is the community at the moment then? So where are you spanning, or do you connect with people all around the world, or sort of, what's the gauge of the size of it?
Yeah, so I think follow, if you want to use social media as a small gauge to start with, we kind of have, I think, maybe 1,100 followers on Instagram, around 2,500 maybe on Twitter, and then about 5,000-ish on Facebook. The reach is worldwide, so we will get contact from obviously mostly English speaking countries, because it's been set up in English. The website may be something we can look at again in the future, but for the time being, it's all in English. We get quite a lot of contact from the US, Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, good, I suppose, other countries which do a great job of teaching English and learning English. So places like Scandinavia have been in contact quite regularly as well, and Canada too. So yeah, there's a real worldwide appeal for this sort of stuff, this sort of approach, and it just says that what we've stumbled upon in terms of providing this kind of peer support and peer education, if you like, is an area which hasn't been widely adopted anywhere in the world. So what we're doing is hopefully encouraging people to obviously be involved with us, but again, I hope people just are inspired to maybe even try their own versions, or try a different route that maybe is the ideas come from the diabetes football community, because I think there's a lot in helping each other and helping and educate each other through sort of peer support.
Yeah, I go back now to, again, the time you were diagnosed, the time I was diagnosed, and the parallels as we were growing up, in that the reasoning for doing the things like we're doing is none of this existed before for us, like social media, even like support groups. I recall growing up, there was literally nothing apart from maybe a pamphlet or one of the nurses trying to connect me with another diabetic, which never really transpired. And then you are isolated. Then you are the center of the universe. You're the center of your world, anyway. And that world, that it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, the more isolated you feel. So to be able to talk about it, to be able to do the videos, to be able to share more experiences, especially in things like camps and groups and communities and forums. And I remember when the internet first came out, to age me, and it was an amazing thing. And that is, yeah, utilizing these tools now to lessen the impact, or the negative impact of diabetes. But on the flip side, you have to go through some negative things as a diabetic in order to learn and grow as well. It's not all roses and everything being shiny all the time, because you'll never grow or learn when things do go wrong. In terms of the guiding principles, and it's similar to what I've done as well with what I've written about, hopefully in my book that's going to come out, and that I have sort of they're called the 4 pillars. One of them is the knowledge. It's the same as the education. Intelligence is one of them, and you can have all the knowledge. If you don't apply it correctly, then it's a waste of time as well. And one of the biggest things that I love is fitness. Again, the application of fitness in good control and education of diabetes. I think one of the most impactful things that I did to change my lifestyle was taking up CrossFit. And that really turned my world upside down and made things a million times better. So it's quite extreme for me, and other people do CrossFit. I know other people do their other sports. Just do something. If you don't move, if you sit on the couch, or if you're inactive in any way at the moment, do something more than you did do yesterday, shall we say. Get up off the couch and go for a 1 kilometer walk. Get off the couch and do something else, and then try and do a 2 or 1.5 kilometer walk the next day, and slowly build and build and build, and you'll notice that your diabetes will change. And there's lots of resources out there to show the impact of fitness, of sport, and how well it changes diabetes, isn't there? Do you find that with the people that join the football community, say the kids or the newly diagnosed people? Obviously there's a lot of questions that go around their head. It's like, wallop, you're diabetic, and you go, what do I do? What do I do now? What am I allowed to do? What sport can I do? What can I not do? So yeah, what sort of impact have you seen once the community got together?
Wow, I've seen some really big impacts on people, from changing the whole way that they manage the condition, from sort of knowledge that they've picked up from conversations, or from being around people within the community. So there's always some good examples, but just to name, not to name one, but just to almost think about their stories. So there was one guy that came in, and he was on sort of old mixture insulin. So, and this was only a few years ago. So, and he kind of got to a place where he wasn't maybe taking fully on board what the healthcare professionals were saying. He was kind of happy with where he was at, and until he came into contact with us, was kind of accepting of quite a few hypos, and challenges with his condition, and also a lack of, if you like, variability. So he had a lot of structure because he was on mixture insulin, more structure than he needed to have, because he could have adapted things a little bit more if he was on sort of basal bolus. So he was involved with us, and from having 2 injections a day and obviously finger prick testing, within a few months he was kind of onto basal bolus and utilizing sort of flash technology at the time, using the Freestyle Libre. So and he's now gone on to do great things with his sport, and that's just one example. There's a number of that might have gained confidence that they didn't have before. I can think of a couple that came in newly diagnosed, lots and lots of questions, slightly fearful of getting back involved in football or futsal, and walk through the door and, I wouldn't say immediately feel at ease, but by the time that they leave, they kind of feel they've got a community around them that's willing to support them, willing to answer their questions, and is going to encourage them to want the best for them with their condition and whatever they want to do with their sport. And that's kind of how we sort of approach any situation within our communities. We're just trying to get the best out of the person that comes in and gets into contact with us. Now, they might do it for different reasons. It could be because of a bad hypo. It could be because they're newly diagnosed. It could be because they're in a rut, or, they're feeling like diabetes is getting on top of them. But as soon as they come in, we hope to have a really positive impact. So, and I've seen a number of those people and a number of those stories, and we've shared quite a few of them on our blog. We've shared them on our podcast as well. So if people want to hear those stories and understand how the diabetes football community does impact, they are out there as well in our media, if you like.
And this doesn't just apply to diabetics, actually. Once that person has that empowerment, the impact outside, not of just themselves, with their family, their friends, their relationships, their work, from their fitness, as I say, it resonates, or I call it the halo effect, with everything it is. There's so much more that happens when you take control of of your responsibility as a diabetic. Although it might be oh, there's the dogs. Philo, so just leaving. Right, one moment. I've just got to go because. Oh. They're both going now. So, right, 2 seconds, right. Right, sorry. Yeah, right. Well, it's either I'll include that or I'll chop it out. I don't know. So yeah, that with taking control of your diabetes, for anyone that's listening, there's always room to improve, and we're not saying we're perfect by any stretch, and I am not. Right, shush. No, they're both fighting. Right, both dogs are fighting now. So, so right, take 3, 4, 5. So I can't even remember what I'm talking about now. So yeah, taking control, and like I say, no, there is no perfect diabetic as well. For any, like let's say we talk through, I'd say our years behind us and experiences, knowledge, but by no means am I flying the flag of perfection. Only sort of sharing those experiences, and some things that I did wrong, like say I've paid the price. by losing my eyesight, and then we all go through these things, but it has defined me, one thing, and I utilize that now for like what you're doing in that positive sense. And I do not want anyone else to go through what I went through. 10 eye operations, like lost 4 years of my life in recovery, in depression, anxiety, drove me to near suicide by losing my sight. Panic attacks. That's the other dog. Panic attacks and all these things. But again, I had my wife with me. I had CrossFit again, with that community of people that were there, and a purpose. I redefined what I wanted to do as well to keep me going. So, and then obviously doing this podcast, which I started this year, has really helped in a cathartic way of talking to people like you and connecting with other diabetics, which I never ever did do before. So yeah, the diabetes football community. And then you mentioned something else that you also were involved with, didn't you? The type 2 information, or the knowledge side of things. Or so please do explain more about that side of things, because yeah, type 2 represents 90 odd% of all diabetics. So us type 1s are in that smaller 10%, but yeah, the majority is type 2. So let's talk about the common misconceptions, or actually talk about what you do with that side of things, and then we'll try and get through some misconceptions about type 2 diabetes also.
Yeah, so I am if you like, a health and wellbeing coach on the type 2 diabetes prevention program. So for the last 2 years or so, kind of using some of my experiences with type 1 to blend into then supporting through an education program, which helps to sort of inspire people, motivate them, and give them the knowledge of lifestyle that they can then implement in their own lives to reduce the risk of developing type 2. So they've been sort of identified potentially as being at risk, and we hopefully support them with gaining knowledge and inspiration, motivation, those sorts of things to take that into their own lives and make changes to hopefully set them on the path which avoids the condition altogether. So I've been doing that for a couple of years. That's my background in sports. I would have worked heavily around the physical activity element of that program. So I used to deliver in-person sessions. So I used to be out in the community, sort of if you want to call it, like small seminars to people.
Okay.
I did a number of those across the sort of the Midlands area, and then I did them online when the pandemic hit as well as doing some of the sort of psychological sessions as well around stress and sleep and habits and sort of values and motivation. So I used to run some of those sessions as well. And then I kind of, obviously through type 1 diabetes, you get a knowledge of nutrition. So you kind of got that kind of element, which you're always sort of falling back on, because if you don't know too much about your food, you're going to find living with type 1 hard. So you kind of get into that as that's a must have as somebody living with type 1, is a bit of a knowledge around your food choices and how they're going to play a part in your blood glucose levels. So you do learn a fair bit from that. So yeah, I've been utilizing some of those areas that I've been involved in, hoping to understand and utilize some of that further in the future as well. We're hoping to do some stuff around with schools around lifestyle and the full impact of diabetes as well. So from type 1, type 2, and sort of a prevention perspective. So yeah, I've been wanting to use my experiences with the condition to help inspire those that aren't living with it to, from almost like a reverse perspective, like this life that I've got is not amazing. You know what I have to do. Can this help you then go, do you know what? I really don't want to.
I don't want to go down that road.
Chris has got. Yeah, I don't want to go down that road if I can avoid it. And
Yeah.
that is quite a powerful tool. It's not in our world where we would be really positive and we would be like, you know, you can live a great life, you can still be fulfilled, you can still do all these wonderful things whilst living with a condition. This is kind of like a reverse of that. And yeah, I'm sort of showcasing what the negatives are of it a little bit. I don't do it too much, only when I'm asked really in sessions. But it helps give them some realism, which goes, "Do you know what? Poor, not really fancying what Chris is going through there on a daily basis. So do you know what? That's probably motivated me even more to make some of these lifestyle changes that Chris is sharing in his sessions to, reduce that risk." So been involved in that for a couple of years. That's alongside obviously what I do with the diabetes football community and some of my, if you like, sporting commitments. And I've done a few bits of lecturing and social media stuff and podcasting and things over the last few years. So yeah, I've really enjoyed that. It's very different to the type 1 world. So it's a different way of working. So it's kind of helped me in some ways to be a bit more rounded with my approach to the word diabetes.
Yeah, and again, it encompasses both type. Well, actually, not just 2 types, but the 1.5, the type 3. I think there was as well, and gestational diabetes as well. And there's, how shall we say, there's a lot of application of the methodologies of type 1 to type 2, and things like my personal experience. And this is the same because type 2 people do have insulin, does work, but there's a problem there with the absorption rate and the sensitivity and what it does. Now, are you going through certain things with them, like, again, obviously the food choices, which many people don't really think about? They just go, I want that food, I'm going to eat that food, eat. Whereas obviously we have to go, there's that food, what is the carbohydrate? When is it going to be doing what? How quickly will it do? What do I need to do there? Where am I going to be in 3 hours? Where am I going to, we're always future planning, always doing those things. And did you find that when you talk to people like that are potentially at risk, that their food knowledge was limited, or they didn't really think about it? It was almost taken for granted that, hey, I can eat what I want and I can do what I want. And obviously there is the data out there is to say that the higher body fat percentage you do have, the more insulin resistant you are to, and the less you move, shall we say, because it could be any physical exercise. Again, the more insulin resistant you are. Again, also there's 2 fundamental components of change. There is, one is to move more, 2 is to reduce body fat. 2 really sort of basic things that can help reduce that type 2 risk factors, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
So did you find on your encounters that people did fall into these categories, shall we say?
Yeah, I think we'd be lying if we said there wasn't going to be a strong majority of those that I speak to that have some of those challenges for sure. So there's a higher BMI, or there's a reason why people are unable to be physically active.
Can I interject there? And again, I like to push the norms. I don't include BMI, and this is me personally, only because I know they use it in the doctors and other things, but I don't find it true representation of body composition, only because muscle and fat and obviously different body compositions can skew those BMI results, and someone might argue with me about this. But yeah, if you have a more muscle, because I again, this was evident with me. I was 9.9% body fat when I did my challenge. I got to that. I looked at my BMI, and I would have been categorized as obese still in my BMI calculation. So I don't typically include that in my data and calculations, but what I do is to really take note of my body fat percentage and my lean weight and other things. But that's obviously just because I find it a bit more true representative of how my training regimen works, and obviously it is a bit more extreme than others.
Yeah, you've got to add context. And the reason why BMI is useful is because it actually focuses more on a sedentary population, which is more going to be where people come through the door in terms of the healthcare system. Athletes and sporty people are not necessarily going to be going into doctor's surgeries and through into NHS settings very often, which is why for me, why BMI is utilized in that setting. So I get your point, and I fully understand, because I go into my settings, if you like, with type 1, and I'm one of the rare ones where they go, oh, your BMI is a little bit on the higher side, and and you go, well, yeah, it's because of this and that, and I know why. But because most people with a chronic health condition or comorbidities don't live a life like that, that's where BMI becomes a little bit more useful, I guess. But yeah, there's I think the risk factors that you talked about, Brett, are 100% within the populations and the people that I speak to. They're there. There's a lot of comorbidities. There's a lot of people that might be finding challenges with their physicality. Things have happened to them as well in life, and I hear a lot about both mental health challenges, which have caused a spiral and a real challenge in the way they look after themselves, or tragedy is struck. Sometimes it's a really tough job. You hear some really tough stories about how people have been impacted and their lives have gone down this spiral of choices for lifestyle that's sometimes been out of their control. Sometimes, granted, it's been within their control. But so there's an element of, I think some people, they just need some support from us, and that's what we hope to do, and we just encourage and we do our very best to give them the tools that they need just to get them started. And I try to go into it with as an open mind as possible, because no one person is ever the same, no one conversation is ever the same, and I don't want to judge based on maybe the risk factors that they do present, that is something that they just fall into a box and they just one of those risk factors. There's often really good reasons for why people's lifestyles are the way they are, and I think that's the way that I try to approach my coaching, is just with a really open mind to the fact that my life is very different to the other person's life at the end of that phone, and I understand that they may fall into some risk factors, but I'm going to probably find out a good reason as to why they do. And what we'll do on this program is really help to maybe just set them on the path which reduces their risk of ultimately getting a condition or maybe another condition, which is again not great for their health.
I think that comes from the empowerment, or the realization, when they have the realization that every day you can change, and you don't have to go down, or you don't have to stay in the same patterns that you might have stayed in, that you do have the ability, by shifting only a few variables or changing only a couple of things. Because if you say to someone, right, change these 10 things, they're like, whoa, I have to change all this in my life. But drip feed them, have one thing, take control of that, implement that into your life over the next month, then make another small change. Those risk factors then start to compound each other and then reduce over time, don't they, as well?
Yeah, 100%. We talk about it on the program. For example, it could be anyone, but just as a throwaway example for you, somebody has 2 biscuits a day, and we say, biscuits aren't great for you, but then they'll go, oh, you're asking me to, give up biscuits. Well, say if you just, or maybe you have 4, and you cut out 2 of those, and then all of a sudden across a week you've left 14 biscuits less. And then across a month, imagine the amount that you're reducing your number of biscuits by. You're not only are you going to help your pocket in terms of buying the amount of biscuits that you would need to continue with that habit, but you're also going to have a huge impact then on how on your lifestyle and maybe your risk factor in terms of weight. That will help reduce across a number of, it's not going to happen tomorrow, it's not going to happen next week, but you might notice that in 2 months, 3 months time, that might have had an impact.
Yeah, I'll do this wide term of humans. They don't like change generally, and this is quite well known. Humans live in this comfort zone and patterns of not adopting too much change, but introducing small changes and then seeing results is one of the most beneficial things to them. This is why when God, this is why when you're doing programs like weight loss programs or change programs, it's why you take the photos of yourself, because that visual impact shows you results, because day to day you don't see it yourself, but if you put a photo side by side, you then see the impact and change of those small changes through your journey, shall we say. So yeah, right. Technology. Now we'll go back to when we were diagnosed in the 80s and 90s. Syringes, pens, harrowing blood glucose testing with machines that were like guillotine, that like destroyed your fingers. Urine tests, all these lovely things that were done and to test with your blood glucose, which were way beyond accurate. That I recall there was these color charts, and they had like between 5 and 9, and then 9 and 30, 9 and 12 or something. There was a wide scale. What's been the impact of technology upon your life with diabetes and the community that you serve as well? How this collection of data and information and access to it. I'm actually also I qualified as a junior data analyst as well. So I love data, and I'm a programmer. So I love like analyzing everything that I do. Like I say, it's one of those things. You can expose holes in your regimen. You can see where there's opportunities. You can see where to change. So yeah, how has it impacted you?
I think there's a few different ways that technology's impacted. I think there's a earlier period of my life where it impacted slightly differently, or what you would use as a term of technology was probably viewed slightly differently. And then there's been more recently with obviously the developments in terms of like continuous glucose monitoring, which has had another big impact. But going back to sort of the starting point of where it began for me, I think obviously the starting place of 2 injections a day and having a kind of finger prick testing kit and stuff like that. Mine weren't too bad. They weren't as probably where yours were, Brett, in terms of that big guillotine thing. That
Yeah,
sort of, I know. Yeah, I
know
know
the
about them.
the blue one with the and that was from the
like,
80s. Yeah,
yeah. It's like somebody's just coming down to like dagger you with this
correct.
thing.
There was there was none of this softness technology or anything.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
I sorry.
missed that. I skipped it, Brett. I skipped it, luckily.
Yeah.
So I was on the kind of little pen finger prick. So luckily I got to that point just about, because I think that they sort of came in the mid 90s, I think, from what I know from other people. So yeah, I had that towards the end. So at the starting point, obviously 2 injections a day. So for me, technology and how I view the word technology, the first change was actually changing from getting off analog insulin onto the basal bolus regime. That's, for me, to be honest, the biggest change in technology. It actually gave me a lot more freedom in my life than I'd ever had before. I didn't need to inject at the same time every day. I didn't need to structure my world around when I had to have a meal. I didn't have to go to school and like as soon as a particular time came, I needed to eat something, or when lunchtime came around at a particular time, I had to go and eat. I'd have to skip a lesson or leave a lesson early because I had to go and eat at a particular time because of the insulin I was on. And, that changing to an insulin then allowed you to literally just when you're eating, inject, was game changer. So, and it also I felt fitter, healthier when I was on that insulin compared to the first mixture insulin as well. So I had less hypos. Everything was a bit more predictable. So for me, that was a huge change for technology, and glad I got into that sort of around my teenage years, because I think I was about 14, because it helped massively as I grew older, and then obviously the impact in the last few years. So that for me was, for 10 years things was pretty similar, status quo, and then obviously continuous glucose monitoring comes in more towards the last sort of 5-6 years, and yeah, that's another level. It's stepped up again. So I had all that freedom before, but now I've got a bit of a safety blanket, I like to call it, with this thing that alarms and tells me what's going wrong. And it helps me analyze further and catch different trends and understand where things are going right, where things are going wrong, and I can learn from them and put something in place next time to make sure it doesn't happen again. And that's helped massively then with the sport for me when I've been trying to push for high performance in the last sort of 5 years. It massively contributed to being able to consistently perform at a good level on a football or a futsal pitch, and reducing. I think it's given me more time to actually be in the moment and less time thinking about diabetes all the time. You can be more present, whether that's in sport or just in life, because I feel like I don't have to think so much about how I'm feeling. Whereas before I was always focused on, am I feeling a hypo?
Yeah.
Have I eaten enough? What's my insulin going to have done? And you're just, I don't know, felt a little bit on edge, not all the time, but at times. And this has just taken that edge off because it's there to catch me if I fall, basically.
I do recall, let's say, technology is the application of the evolution of anything, by the way, to the listeners, is like the syringe to the original syringe, the metal one, to the plastic syringes, to the BD pens, it's all technology. And it makes technology simply makes life easier. Now, I remember the CGM and the tandem were probably two of the biggest impacts in my life. One was the CGM because I'd lost my hypo awareness, and that was critically dangerous for me. Like there's nothing quite as scary as waking up in a pool of blood and thinking, what the hell has just happened? And that was the reason I got the CGM, in that it just happened. I smashed my head on the way down into a door handle. My wife was out. There was no one here. And luckily I'd woken up and I'd cut a small artery above, of all things, above my eye. So yeah, that, and losing your hyper awareness is what is a really weird thing. And I got quite obsessive with doing my blood sugar, like every 15 minutes. Like it got into a bad sort of mental health state because I was this really fearful thing. And then the CGN came, and wow, that transformed everything. Then I was on Omnipod first, was my pump, and that was another absolute game changer with Omnipod. And then the tandem came. I loved Omnipod, but the tandem came, and the basal pausing, and then Control IQ came, and that really opened up my sort of fitness journey with CrossFit, and that then made me like I could really push for hours doing all sorts. And I want to touch upon this about your football and futsal routine and playing for certain amounts of time and strategies that you employ to do that. But yeah, the technology thing, what's your thoughts or hopes for, let's say, 10, 20 years time?
Well, I'm sure you, like me, have had the promise of many, many things 10 years away over the last 30 years that you've had it, 35 years that you've had it, Brett, and you're like the same for me. Like since I had it, you probably won't need to do this in 10 years time, we'll have cured it, or
no.
So I've gone past the thought of cures and stuff like that. I think what I would like to see in, let's call it 15 years, because I think it's probably more realistic for 15 than maybe 10 or 20, is the whole closed loop thing to be mass produced, on a, like everybody with type 1 getting closed loop technology, which is where, for anyone listening that hasn't come across it, is where obviously continuous glucose monitoring meets insulin pumps, and they talk to each other, and they basically really help in terms of the doses and monitoring and almost talking to each other to make sure levels don't go too high or too low. So I think that's a realistic thing to be looking at in between that sort of 10 and 20 years. And that's what I would hope for. I hope that I will be on closed loop technology in the next 10 to 15 years. And me amongst everyone. That's what I would like. It's all right being in a position of maybe a position of privilege, but it'd be great to see that so many people with type 1, no matter the background, no matter where you're from, having access to that technology.
Again, with everyone should have it, only for the benefit of the, shall we say, the national health system in the UK, for example, where we are, in that it stops those long-term complications as well. This is the one thing that I think back in, like, a number of diabetics now, or the kids or the people that diagnose now, their chances of having a really good future have grown a lot as the decades have gone by, and through the adoption of the technology, like, you're going to lead a relatively good, quote unquote, normal, which I don't like to use, but because we're all normal, a good life with being a diabetic. So it's, and one other thing was the insulins that come out, technology in terms of insulin, having that with like the CGM, the new tandem, the tandem, and things like this. There's a new rapid acting insulin that's out, which you don't have to do this 20 minutes before bolusing as well. It literally acts within, I think, 5 minutes. I was told, and I'm hoping to get on that at some point.
Yeah, the
Fias, but it's not. You can't use it in the tandem, so it's not authorized for use in there. So we have to wait. So in terms of your sporting, so you say you play a game of football. How long does futsal play for? What's the format there?
So futsal's it's a 40-minute game, 20-minute halves, but they're stop clock. So
Right.
They're a bit like basketball in terms of the way that they play that. So it actually ends up being more like a 35-minute half.
Right.
If you were to play it like football, where obviously the clock continues. So
Yeah.
I would guess about 35 minutes in that sense, but obviously it's 20 minutes stop clock each half.
And then football's normal 90 minutes with 15 minutes half time into. So what's your strategy for going into let's say you played professional, yes? Or semi-professional?
Semi-professional.
We'll say semi-professional. So what was your strategy for football at that time? What did you do in terms of preparation, food, post game? Because obviously, for people that don't know, say you do your different types of exercise, or you do weightlifting, various things happen with your body post exercise as well, like glycogen dumps and glycogen intake, again, that the body demands after doing certain things as well. So what did you do in the process of playing a game?
For me, it's routine and structure is probably the key things, and organization. And organization, I mean having things prepared that you need. So those are probably the key places that I start. And you start the night before. So for me, I'd have a meal which I knew wasn't probably going to cause me any issues in terms of I knew, or I could understand and expect what was going to happen. I wouldn't have a meal that I hadn't had before. So I wanted to have something that I knew roughly how it would play out. And that is a principle that I then would have on game day as well. The foods I eat are things that I regularly eat, and I know what to expect from them. So night before, a meal, relatively normal size meal, carbohydrates, etc. Just something that I knew how it was going to respond. Hydrate well, get a good night's sleep, and then get up in the morning. And the key then for me was about the timings of doses. So I'm trying to get in breakfast and a small lunch before kickoff at 3, for example, on a Saturday. That means that I need to have had breakfast probably before 9 o'clock. So I probably need to eat something by about 8:30, or have had my insulin dose by 8:30, because then I want my lunch at about 12. And knowing the way that my insulin profiles, I know that it's going to be about 3 hours. It's going to have tailed right off. So I want a 3-hour window between almost everything I do on that day. So my 2 meals, I'm trying to get 3 hours in between them. And then I would like to get my insulin, if I can, at least sort of 2.5 for lunch, at least kind of 2.5 to 3 hours before kickoff, because that gives me the best opportunity to sort of, when I come to play, when I do that last check of my blood glucose levels, I know I'm now not really being impacted by any short-term insulin, my Nova Rapid. So I kind of go about it with the insulin profiles in mind, and then the structure and food that I've regularly eaten. So those foods, probably a couple of pieces of toast to start the day, and then at lunchtime a classic sort of pre-game meal might have been like a small sandwich with maybe a yogurt and a cereal bar, something like that. These were the sorts of things I would eat pre-football game day, just to keep a little bit of carbohydrate, not go mad, because you will have done that across the week. And the principle really is around then doing as much testing as possible. So I'm trying to test around breakfast, lunchtime, before I leave to get in the car, when I get to the other end of the car journey, before I start warming up. Then it's the after the warm-up test, and then it's the pre-game test, and then you come in at half-time and you test. So across game day, I would have been my fingers would have been sore by the end of the day, because I would have literally probably gone through every finger that I would have I would finger prick on. They all would have had a prick on game day. So because you need to test as frequently as you can, just to see where it's going, because then that allows you to respond appropriately. So that's when I talked about earlier about the organization and the prep. I'd have my glucose treatments, or my hypo treatments, my glucose tabs, or my Lucozade Sport, or something like that, which I knew was quick acting glucose that I would utilize if I could see that my levels were going out of kilter or not in the right place to play. And then obviously my insulin, if it was in the other direction, it was too high, or I was rising and I'm concerned I'm going to be out of range, or what I would like to start the game at. And I kind of like to start the game where I can at around 7 or 8 for a football match, knowing that, I'm probably going to be about 5 coming in at half time, maybe, or similar, 5 or 6. And I probably need a little bit of something at half time to go out into the second half, maybe a 10, 15 grams of maybe fast acting carbs at half time, and then go out into the second half. But again, it also depends on how much you play as well, Brett. So you kind of, if I've played 45 minutes and then I get dragged after 5 minutes, 10 minutes in the second half, because maybe I'm not having a great game, or maybe it's a tactical decision, then that impacts then on what you do post-game. So I think 50, 60 minutes, you need less of a post-game adjustment than if you've gone the full 90. Yeah. So when I'm kind of getting through my second half, if I think, right, I'm going full 90 here, or I'm going to play, deep into the 80 minutes, 80, 85 minutes, which is the majority of the game, I know that when I come to have my post-game meal, which I'm trying to get on as quick as I can after, so like within an hour if you can, showered, get some food in, I know I've probably got, if I'm doing that, I'm probably going to need to reduce my insulin by like 50%. So it's going to have to be reduced by that much to ensure I kind of, don't cause myself any hypos. But gradually, as you play less and less minutes, so if I was to play 45 minutes, for example, I won't make any adjustment. If I was to play 60 minutes, or 65 minutes for that post game, I might be maybe 75% of the usual dose. So it's a 25% reduction, because it's like your reserves are going to be more and more depleted the longer and longer you go into the game, the endurance and the test that you've put on your body. And obviously the less minutes you play, the less that you'll have delved into some of those reserves. So I kind of judge it on game time, and sometimes the intensity of the game. Sometimes positionally can play a part as well. So, if I played at right back and we've had an easy game at the back and we won 5-0, probably need to have a think about that at the end of the game, because I might not have done as much running, or I might not have been tested as much as other games. So these are all parts of the thinking and the thought process really for game day, and some of the routine and the way that I sort of approach it, Brett.
Do you measure how far you run? Do you collect that data when you're playing football, like on, say, a smartwatch or anything?
No, I've never done that. And also the clubs that I've been at, we're going back a few years in terms of, I've mostly been playing futsal in the last few years. So the clubs didn't have access to that sort of stuff. They probably are starting to look more and more at that in semi-professional football now. But yeah, I never measured my distance in terms of games or anything like that.
Yeah, it would again. Again, I find it interesting because you could correlate certain data, say, with playing a half or a full, and as you say, the reason. So, just for the people who are listening, the reason why you dial down your dosage, so at say the end of a 90-minute game, is your body's in this super sensitive mode as well. Generally after any 20-30 minute exercise, your body does become more sensitive to insulin after exercise. So yeah, be wary if you're dosing after any exercise, that you'll probably need to dial it down. And again, things like dosing in the morning, you're also more sensitive in the morning as well, when you wake up, as opposed to in the afternoon when you're a bit more insulin resistant as well. I was talking about this last week with Paul, and sort of this information and variability of living the diabetic life.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't even know what time we're on. It's been about an hour, hasn't it? So yeah, I try to keep it about an hour. So we're going to finish up 3 key pieces of advice for the listeners, really, for even for the diabetics, the non-diabetics, but yeah, three things that you would like to put across.
I'm going to say one being preparedness. So I think as people with diabetes, we can tackle most things in life, but we've just got to be prepared. We've probably got to put in a little bit more organization than others do to make sure we're able to go and enjoy those things that we want to tackle and do. I think another one would be follow the path that fulfills you. So make sure you no matter what it is and no matter how difficult it could be with your condition, you need to make sure that you do it. You know, we only get one crack at this life, and how we go about it and what we want to do and achieve is different from person to person. So you need to make sure that you follow those dreams and you do the thing that you want to do, and diabetes just comes along for the ride in amongst all of that. And maybe the last one is just to believe. You know, I think that there's a lot of people that with diabetes might think that they are lesser, or you know, then their contribution or the way that they are as a human being is hindered, or might not be able to stack up against other people that are without the condition. And I think it's about belief that you can achieve things, whatever that looks like, whatever it may be, whatever you're facing, you know, whether that's complications. You know, there's so many of us that will unfortunately go through complications in life, but belief is about working out ways to overcome them and believing that no matter what we're facing, there is a way and a route around it to achieving what that looks like for you. You know, and achievements will always be what we set them out to be. So I think it's about belief and really altering what that means to who you are, and positive, because it sort of it blends itself into the word positivity. And I think positivity will always have then a greater outcome and a more fulfilling outcome for your life than any negativity will.
Yeah.
So I think those would be my key bits of info, my key bits of what to pass on anyway, Brett.
I'll add in, as you say, the word positivity, and the one thing is if anyone is going through that negative cycle, you do have the ability to switch that negative, and I use it as fuel now. I used to take this, like, all this negative thing, and it would eat me up, and it will do anyone. It eats you up. But then I learned to channel it into utility of energy in a, as we say, positive way. It's simply fuel, and positive does go with negative. They are intrinsically linked anyway. So there's a reason for that negative, and it's something. It's a lesson to teach you, and you use that to grow as well. Don't ever disregard the negative as something that isn't useful, because it is useful.
100%. I think like I carried the fact that I live with diabetes as a negative chip, if you like. That diagnosis was a negative chip on my shoulder, which I carried for an awful long time, and I still carry it, because what it does do is it humbles me every day, Brett, and it teaches me, or it did teach me, that you can overcome this, and it's driven me into achieving. I might not have achieved or pushed myself in the way that I've pushed myself in life had I not have had diabetes. And that is simply by viewing a negative situation and flipping it round to using it as fuel, as you said, Brett, to make sure that I push myself to achieve, or push myself in a positive direction, rather than, maybe just fall in there at that first hurdle where I was diagnosed, and allowing myself to fall into a negative cycle.
And as we said, so there's a big community out there. So as you said before about the complications, there potentially are going to be complications that everyone goes through. The one thing is that there has been someone that has been through it. Generally, this is this is not new. It's been around for a long time. There's been lots of operations. There's been lots of things. So yeah, reach out via social media to people, to anyone. Just search for diabetes community anywhere, or what are your social media handles or websites that sort of where people can connect with you and the community there, just in case they want to reach out, or there's parents or football people or anyone that wants to learn more.
Yeah, so my handles personally is at Chris Bright with a Y on it, Y on the end, so Chris Brighty and then the number 1. So that's me on Twitter and Instagram. And then the diabetesfootballcommunity.com is our website, and you can find the Diabetes Football Community on Facebook if you search it, and also it's at the Diabetes Football Community on Instagram, and at TDFC Diabetes on Twitter. So those are probably the key places to find the organisation and the community, as well as myself.
Okay then, right, we are going to wrap up. So I wish to say thank you to you, Chris, for your time, for the conversation, and I hope it's been useful to people. I am the Conscious Diabetic, as it would be. You can find me on Spotify, Conscious Diabetic. I'm now on Amazon Music, the Conscious Diabetic, YouTube, Conscious Diabetic, and guess what? Instagram and Facebook, the same. So yeah, thank you to everyone that listened. The next couple of weeks, we're going to be having a dude that has ran across America. We've got some ultra marathon runners. We've got a cool dude in the UK who's a bodybuilder. I've got some awesome guests coming up. So yeah, keep in touch, like, subscribe, do whatever you need to do. Big love to everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Goodbye.
For more information about being a conscious diabetic, check out consciousdiabetic.com. Check out our Conscious Diabetic socials on Instagram and Facebook at Conscious Diabetic. Are you a conscious diabetic? Leave us your reviews and feedback.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. Big love. Love.
Love.
From all of us.